"Get out of the way, kid." They laughed at her, those battle-hardened men with their tactical gear and years of combat experience, never expecting what would happen next. Their mockery turned to stunned silence when she stepped up to the firing line, weapon steady in hands they assumed were too delicate for war. The impossible happened when she fired the first round, hitting targets they had struggled to reach with deadly precision that defied every assumption they'd made about her. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The battered UN transport truck ground to a halt, its aging suspension groaning in protest against the unforgiving terrain. Clouds of red clay dust billowed around the vehicle, settling on equipment and clinging to the sweaty faces of the men inside. Chief Petty Officer Griggs was the first to emerge, squinting against the harsh Kenyan sun as he surveyed the desolate landscape stretching before them. "Everybody out," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of military service. The SEAL team filed out behind him, their movements precise despite the exhaustion of a 14-hour journey. They had expected to meet their local contact, perhaps a weathered militia commander or at minimum a seasoned guide familiar with the territory. Instead, they found only a teenage girl standing alone at the edge of the dirt road, a worn bolt-action rifle slung across her narrow shoulders. Keone Wanjiru regarded them with unwavering eyes, her posture straight and confident despite her small frame. She couldn't have been older than 16, yet she carried herself with the gravity of someone far beyond her years. "You the welcoming committee?" Griggs asked, unable to mask his disappointment. The girl nodded once. "I am Keone Wanjiru. I will guide you to the research station." A ripple of amusement spread through the team. Petty Officer Martinez nudged his companion, not bothering to lower his voice. "We crossed half the world to get babysitting duty?" Laughter erupted among the men, echoing across the empty fields. Even Lieutenant Sarah Cho, standing apart from the others while checking coordinates on her device, couldn't suppress a skeptical glance. "Get out of the way, kid," Griggs barked, gesturing dismissively. "We need someone who actually knows the terrain. Where's Dr. Mabiru? We were told he'd arrange proper security." Keone didn't flinch. "The doctor is at the station. I know every inch of this land. I am your guide." "We don't have time for this," Griggs muttered, turning to address his team. "Cho, radio ahead. Tell them we need actual support, not—" "The mercenaries have surveillance drones scanning this area," Keone interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "If you use your radio now, they will triangulate your position within minutes." Something in her tone made Griggs pause. He studied the teenager more carefully, noting the weathered condition of her rifle, not a prop, but a well-maintained tool. The way her fingers rested on the stock spoke of familiarity, and the tension in her shoulders revealed a readiness that contradicted her youth. The SEALs continued to exchange amused glances, but their laughter had died down. There was something in the girl's steady gaze that hinted at knowledge beyond their understanding, something the Americans, for all their training and technology, could not yet see. The crack of Keone Wanjiru's rifle split the air with a sound as sharp and final as thunder. There was no warning, no hesitation, just the practiced motion of her slender frame adjusting to the weapon's weight, her breath steadying in the fraction of a second before she squeezed the trigger. 500 meters away, the surveillance drone that had been circling above their position exploded in a brilliant flash of light and twisted metal, its wreckage spiraling downward in a trail of black smoke. The laughter that had been rippling through the SEAL team died instantly. The transition was almost comical, from dismissive smirks to slack-jawed disbelief in the span of a heartbeat. Jaws clenched, eyes narrowed, and hands instinctively tightened around their own weapons as they processed what they'd just witnessed. "Holy shit," muttered one of the younger SEALs, breaking the stunned silence. Chief Petty Officer Griggs stood motionless, his weathered face unreadable as he stared at the distant plume of smoke, then back at the teenage girl. The bolt-action rifle in her hands was old, practically an antique by military standards, yet she had just made a shot that would have challenged his best marksman, Specialist Rodriguez. "Lucky hit," Rodriguez said, but his voice lacked conviction. The specialist squinted against the harsh Kenyan sun, calculating distance and wind variables almost unconsciously. His pride was wounded, but professional respect was beginning to take its place. Keone worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent casing with practiced efficiency. She didn't smile or seek validation. Instead, she simply turned to face Griggs, her intelligent eyes holding his gaze without flinching. "That was their third drone today," she said matter-of-factly, her English clear but accented. "They watch before they come. Always." Lieutenant Sarah Cho stepped forward, her analytical mind already reassessing their tactical situation. "Who's they?" she asked, her attention now fully on the young Kenyan. "The men who want what Dr. Mubiru protects," Keone replied, slinging the rifle over her shoulder with the casual confidence of someone who had grown up with the weight of it against her back. In the sudden hush that followed, Griggs felt the balance of power on this mission shifting beneath his feet. The girl they had dismissed as an inconvenience, or at best, a local guide, had just demonstrated skills that demanded respect. More importantly, she clearly possessed intelligence about threats the team hadn't even confirmed yet. "Briefing tent, 5 minutes," Griggs ordered his team, his voice tight with the effort of recalibrating his approach. Then, turning to Keone, "You too." She nodded once, already walking toward the cluster of tents without waiting for an escort. The red clay dust swirled around her boots with each confident step. Lieutenant Sarah Cho spread the satellite images across the makeshift table, her fingers tracing the unexpected vehicle patterns. The intel they'd received painted a picture of local insurgents, disorganized, under-equipped, and driven by territorial disputes. But these formations told a different story. "These aren't insurgents," she said, pointing to the precision of the encampment, the equipment signatures, the communication patterns. "We're dealing with professionals, mercenaries." Chief Petty Officer Griggs leaned over her shoulder, his weathered face tightening. "Hired guns? Who's bankrolling them?" The answer came from Dr. Elias Mubiru, who entered the tent clutching a tablet. The scientist's usually calm demeanor had given way to visible anxiety. "Aqua Frontier Corporation," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They've been trying to access my research for months." Keone Wanjiru stood silently by the entrance, her rifle still warm from the drone takedown. She watched the Americans process what locals had known for years, that water in this region wasn't just sustenance, but power. "My climate data maps underground aquifer systems across 3 countries," Dr. Mubiru continued. "In the wrong hands, it becomes a blueprint for water theft on an industrial scale." The lieutenant pulled up corporate records on her device. "Aqua Frontier has subsidiaries in 12 countries. They've been buying land around Lake Magadi for years." "Not buying," Keone interjected. "Taking. 3 villages displaced last year alone." Griggs paced the length of the tent. "So we're not here to stop rebels. We're up against corporate mercenaries trying to steal research data?" "Data that could save or condemn thousands," the scientist said, placing his hand protect or complicit, he muttered, glancing toward the horizon where heat waves distorted the landscape. Keone approached them, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "Your government speaks of terrorism and insurgency, but never mentions who profits from our thirst." The weight of her words hung in the air as the team realized they were caught in something larger than military tactics. A struggle for the most fundamental resource on Earth, playing out in the parched fields of Kenya, but reaching into boardrooms and government offices across continents. Dr. Mubiru looked from the just hours earlier. He'd dismissed her as an obstacle to the mission. Now, after witnessing her take down their surveillance equipment with nothing but reflected sunlight, he was forced to reconsider everything. "You're telling me she disabled our recon bot with pocket mirrors?" Lieutenant Sarah Cho asked, disbelief evident in her voice as she reviewed the footage. Griggs nodded grimly. The kid figured out the sensor blind spots and used the sun against us. Took out $3,000 of equipment, with junk she probably found in a trash heap. The decision didn't come easily, but necessity overruled pride. When Griggs finally approached Keone to request her assistance with surveillance, the teenager's expression remained neutral, though a hint of satisfaction flickered in her eyes. "I know this land," she said simply, tucking the mirrors into her pocket. "Your machines don't." Their first patrol together was tense, with Keone walking 10 paces ahead, occasionally stopping to point out hidden paths through the dense brush. The SEALs exchanged skeptical glances behind her back, but followed nonetheless. When she identified a mercenary observation post that their thermal imaging had missed, even the most doubtful team members fell silent. As days passed, an unexpected rhythm developed. Mornings began with Keone guiding them through the labyrinthine fields, teaching them to read the landscape as she did. She showed them how certain birds scattered at the approach of vehicles, how to spot disturbed soil indicating recent movement, and which local plants could provide emergency sustenance. In return, Griggs offered what he knew best. "Keep your center of gravity low," he instructed during their third evening, demonstrating a defensive stance. Someone comes at you with size advantage, you use their momentum against them. Keone absorbed the lessons with intense focus, adapting the techniques to her smaller frame. Yet whenever conversations turned to evacuation or extraction plans, her expression hardened. "My village stays," she would say, the statement brooking no argument. "This is our home." Dr. Mubiru observed their growing alliance with quiet approval. "She won't leave this place," he told Cho one evening. For Keone, this soil is family. Despite their developing partnership, Keone maintained boundaries. She accepted their tactical knowledge, but rejected their assumptions. When a team member suggested abandoning certain fields to create defensive positions, she countered with alternatives that preserved the crops. Her loyalty to the land and its people remained unshakable, even as she learned to move with military precision. For Griggs, each day brought uncomfortable revelations. The girl he'd once ordered to get out of the way was now leading the way, her knowledge proving more valuable than their advanced technology. The balance of power had shifted, and they all knew it. Lieutenant Sarah Cho hunched over her tablet, the blue glow illuminating her face as darkness fell over the research station. Something wasn't right. The mission files she'd been reviewing showed clear signs of tampering, timestamps that didn't align, coordinates that had been subtly shifted, and threat assessments that contradicted her pre-deployment briefing. "This isn't just bad intel," she whispered to herself, scrolling through corrupted data packets. "Someone deliberately set us up." She glanced around the makeshift command center, watching her teammates clean weapons and review maps. Trust had always been the foundation of their unit, but now doubt crept in like the red dust that seemed to infiltrate everything in this place. Dr. Elias Mubiru entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. "You look troubled," he said, offering one to Cho. "The information we received before deployment, it's been altered," she confided, lowering her voice. "These water rights disputes your research documents, they're not just local conflicts. Someone powerful doesn't want your data getting out." The scientist nodded gravely. "I suspected as much when armed men started appearing at the perimeter last month. My findings threaten billions in water futures." Outside, Keone Wanjiru was conducting a perimeter check with Griggs, her voice crackling through the radio. "The hyena who hunts alone leaves tracks that even children can follow," she said matter-of-factly. Griggs' frustrated reply came through. "Speak plainly, kid. What are you seeing?" "Your men are spreading out too far. They make themselves visible against the horizon." "In my language, we have a saying." "Enough with the proverbs," Griggs interrupted. The radio fell silent for a moment before Keone responded. 3 of your soldiers would already be dead if I were your enemy." Cho and Mubiru exchanged glances. The girl was right. The team was making basic mistakes, underestimating the terrain. "The guilt is suffocating," Cho admitted to Mubiru. "I led them here based on compromised information. And now, Now I need to figure out who altered our mission parameters and why. She closed the tactical database and opened a secure channel. But first, I need to warn Griggs that we're operating blind. As night deepened, Keone's voice came through the radio once more. The lion who ignores the gazelle's warning deserves the hunter's trap, she said calmly. This time, Griggs didn't argue. The balance of power was shifting, word by word, warning by warning, as the teenage girl systematically exposed vulnerabilities the elite soldiers had been trained to overlook. The bridge exploded in a flash of orange and black, chunks of concrete raining down into the muddy river below. Chief Petty Officer Griggs watched through binoculars as the mercenaries set up positions on the far side, effectively sealing the valley's only vehicle exit. "They've cut us off," he announced to the gathered SEALs. "The satellite phone is still jammed, and now we've lost our extraction route." Whispers of panic rippled through the villagers who had gathered behind the American soldiers. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, and the elders exchanged worried glances. Even Lieutenant Sarah Cho's usually composed face showed signs of strain as she calculated their dwindling options. Keone Wanjiru stepped forward, her bolt-action rifle slung across her back. "There's another way," she said, voice steady despite the tension. "But it requires crossing 3 kilometers of exposed terrain." The teenager knelt in the red clay, sketching a rough map with a stick. The villagers quieted as she spoke, their trust in her evident. Griggs noticed how they looked to her rather than to his heavily armed team for reassurance. "We need to warn Makena Village," Keone continued. "If the mercenaries take control of both valleys, they'll have access to the entire water supply." As night fell, the group retreated to Dr. Elias Mubiro's research station. The building's concrete walls offered temporary shelter, but everyone knew it wouldn't withstand a determined assault. In the dim light of solar-powered lamps, Keone organized the villagers into teams, some preparing food, others gathering medical supplies. "Someone needs to reach Makena before dawn," Mubiru said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Without reinforcements, we cannot hold out indefinitely." Before Keone could volunteer, Kasim stepped forward. The boy couldn't have been more than 12, with bright eyes that reflected unwavering admiration whenever he looked at Keone. "I can do it," he said. "I'm small and fast. They won't see me." Mirembe, Keone's grandmother, objected immediately, but Kasim held his ground. "I know every animal path through these hills," he insisted. "Keone taught me how to move without being seen." After heated debate, they reluctantly agreed. Near midnight, Keone helped Kasim prepare, wrapping his feet in dark cloth to muffle his footsteps and giving him her precious compass. "Remember what I showed you about using the stars," she whispered, squeezing his shoulder. "Stay low in the ravines." The boy nodded solemnly before slipping into the darkness. Keone watched until his silhouette disappeared completely, then turned back to the task of fortifying their position. Though her hands worked steadily, placing thorny branches across vulnerable approaches and setting up noise traps, her thoughts remained with Kasim, somewhere in the dangerous night. Griggs approached, noticing her distraction. "The kid will make it," he said, awkwardly attempting comfort. "He has to," Keone replied, her eyes fixed on the distant hills. "Because if he doesn't, none of us will." The red sun dipped below the horizon as Keone Wanjiru knelt beside the ancient irrigation channel, her nimble fingers working with practiced precision. Years of tinkering with discarded machinery had given her an intuitive understanding of water flow and pressure that no formal education could match. "What exactly are you doing?" Chief Petty Officer Griggs asked, crouching beside her as she pried open a rusted control valve. "Creating a flood," she replied without looking up. "The mercenaries will bring their vehicles through the eastern ravine. If we redirect the water there, we buy ourselves at least 12 hours. The teenager worked methodically, reconfiguring the decades-old irrigation system her grandfather had helped build. She connected sections of pipe salvaged from abandoned farm equipment, creating a network that would channel water from the village reservoir directly into the narrow passage the enemy would need to traverse. When she finally opened the main valve, water surged through the makeshift system with surprising force. The SEALs watched in silent admiration as a torrent rushed toward the ravine, transforming the dry earth into an impassable quagmire. "The trucks won't make it through that," Lieutenant Cho observed, nodding with approval. "Not for at least a day." Griggs studied the girl with newfound respect. Just days ago, he'd dismissed her as an inconvenience. Now, her ingenuity had accomplished what his advanced military training couldn't. "We've gained time," he acknowledged, "but at what cost?" Keone's eyes followed his gaze to the fields below, where precious water meant for crops now soaked uselessly into the earth. 3 months of planting, drowned in minutes. Food that would never grow. Hunger that would come later. "My people understand sacrifice," she said quietly. "This soil has seen worse." As darkness fell, Griggs sought her out again. The seasoned SEAL sat beside her on a rocky outcrop overlooking the village. "I need your assessment," he said simply. "Where will they come from next?" The question hung between them, an acknowledgement that her understanding of this land surpassed his tactical training. The girl pointed toward a ridge, barely visible in the moonlight. "There, they'll try to establish a position on that hillside by morning." Griggs nodded, then asked the question that had been troubling him. "How did you learn all this? The shooting, the engineering?" "Necessity," Keone answered. "When survival depends on it, you learn quickly." Below them, villagers worked by lamplight, moving precious belongings to higher ground as muddy water encroached on their homes. The price of their temporary safety was evident in every labored step, every worried glance toward the submerged fields. Victory, Keone knew, would demand more sacrifices before this was over. The sandstorm descended without warning, a wall of red fury that engulfed the valley in minutes. Chief Petty Officer Griggs watched helplessly as visibility dropped to mere feet, the fine particles infiltrating every crevice of their equipment. The team's GPS devices flickered and died, satellite communications went dark, and their tactical advantage evaporated like morning dew under the Kenyan sun. "All that fancy tech," Keone Wanjiru muttered, tightening the scarf around her face, "and now you're as blind as newborn puppies." The teenager's words carried no mockery, only pragmatism. She had warned them hours earlier about the telltale signs, the particular stillness of the air, the way the birds had vanished, how the horizon had taken on a copper tinge. Lieutenant Sarah Cho frantically tried to restore communications. Hunched over their equipment inside the makeshift shelter, "Nothing," she reported, frustration evident in her voice. "We're completely cut off." The storm howled around them, transforming the landscape into an alien terrain of shifting shadows and blinding particles. Dr. Elias Mubiru huddled with the remaining research staff, their precious climate data now physically isolated from the outside world. "We need to move," Griggs decided, eyeing the deteriorating shelter. "That ridge offers better protection, and we can regroup there." He pointed vaguely into the swirling chaos. "Which ridge?" Keone asked, her intelligent eyes narrowed. "The one with loose rocks that will slide in this rain-soaked earth? Or the one where mercenaries were spotted yesterday?" The SEALs exchanged glances. Their training had prepared them for hostile environments worldwide, but this, being rendered effectively blind in unfamiliar territory, was a vulnerability they hadn't anticipated. "You know the way," Griggs finally acknowledged, swallowing his pride. "Lead us." Keone nodded, shouldering her bolt-action rifle. She moved with certainty through the storm, following invisible markers, a particular rock formation, the subtle change in ground texture underfoot, the way the wind moved between hills. The young woman navigated by memory and instinct, her knowledge born from a lifetime of walking these lands. The team followed in single file, connected by rope. When the radio sputtered to life briefly, catching fragments of enemy communications, Cho looked at Keone with newfound respect. "How did you know this path would maintain signal?" she asked. "The valley curves here," Keone explained simply. "My father taught me which paths hold voices better than others." As night fell and the storm raged on, the SEALs realized a profound truth. No satellite imagery could replace what Keone carried in her mind, a living map of the land, complete with its moods, dangers, and secrets. In the darkness, her quiet confidence became their most valuable asset, more reliable than any technology they had ever trusted. The night brought a brief respite from the tension. Keone Wanjiru sat alone on a wooden stool outside her family's hut, disassembling and cleaning her rifle with practiced hands. The metal parts gleamed in the dim light of an oil lamp as she worked, her movements precise and methodical. "You should be sleeping," came a familiar voice. Mirembe emerged from the shadows, her weathered face creased with concern. The village elder lowered herself slowly onto a mat beside her granddaughter. Keone continued working without looking up. "I'll sleep when everyone is safe. These Americans and their war, it is not yours to fight," Mirembe said, her voice soft but firm. She reached out, placing a calloused hand over Keone's, stopping the mechanical motion. "Please, child, step back before it's too late." The young woman finally met her grandmother's gaze. "They need me. Without my knowledge of the land, I know what happens when young people pick up weapons," Mirembe interrupted, her eyes suddenly distant. "The person who picks up a gun is never the same one who puts it down." Silence stretched between them, broken only by night insects and the distant murmur of the SEAL team's radio. Finally, Mirembe sighed deeply. "I was 16 when I joined the fighters," she confessed. "During the struggle for independence, not much older than you." Keone's hands stilled completely. "You never told me." "Because I wanted that part of me to die," the elder woman whispered. "I killed 3 men. I still see their faces when I close my eyes. That is the price I paid, and it never ends." The admission hung heavy in the air. Keone tried to imagine her gentle grandmother as a freedom fighter, weapon in hand, and found the image both impossible and suddenly terrifyingly clear. "But this is different," Keone insisted. "I'm protecting our home, our water." Mirembe shook her head slowly. "The cause is always just. The cost is always the same." She gestured toward the research station, where Lieutenant Cho and Dr. Mubiru were working through the night. "Let them fight their own battles." Keone's throat tightened. All her life, she had sought her grandmother's approval. Yet now, with Kasim captured and the village in danger, she couldn't yield, not even for Mirembe. "I'm sorry," she whispered, resuming her work on the rifle. "But if I step aside, who will stand in my place?" Mirembe rose slowly, her disappointment palpable. "Then at least know what you're sacrificing, child. Peace of mind is not something you can ever get back." As her grandmother walked away, Keone felt the weight of responsibility press down harder than before. She longed for approval, but knew some choices left no room for compromise. The rifle in her hands seemed suddenly heavier, as if absorbing the truth of Mirembe's warning. The first sign came at dawn. A scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush near the eastern boundary. One of the SEALs found it, unmistakably from Kasim's blue shirt. The village fell silent as the news spread, mothers pulling children closer, elders gathering in tight circles of whispered prayer. "They have him," Keone Wanjiru said, her voice flat as she examined the torn cloth. Her fingers trembled slightly, though her face remained composed. "He was supposed to stay hidden until nightfall." Chief Petty Officer Griggs studied the surrounding terrain through binoculars. The kid must have tried moving during daylight. Brave, but foolish. A runner from the neighboring ridge arrived breathless with confirmation. Kasim had been spotted being marched toward the mercenary camp, hands bound but walking proudly. The boy had nearly reached the next village when a patrol intercepted him. According to witnesses, he had refused to kneel, staring directly at his captors even as they struck him. He wouldn't tell them anything, the messenger reported. They hit him twice, but he just spit blood and stayed quiet. The village gathered that evening in Mirembe's compound. The grandmother moved slowly among them, offering calming words while her eyes sought out her granddaughter. Keone sat apart, cleaning her rifle with mechanical precision, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "This is my fault," she finally said when Griggs approached. "I should never have let him go." The SEAL leader shook his head. "He made his choice, like you did." Lieutenant Sarah Cho joined them, her tablet displaying thermal imagery of the mercenary camp. "They're keeping him in the eastern structure. At least 6 guards, rotating shifts." She paused, meeting Keone's gaze. "He's still moving around in there. He's alive." Dr. Elias Mubiru arrived with a village elder, both men brave-faced. The mercenaries sent a message. They want the research data in exchange for the boy. Keone's hands stilled on her weapon. They knew exactly who to take. The night deepened around the village, a sense of containment settling like dust. Families huddled in doorways, watching the distant lights of enemy patrols. The SEALs established defensive positions, their movements efficient but tense. Near midnight, Keone approached Griggs as he coordinated watch rotations. "I'm going after him," she stated simply. "Not alone, you're not. This isn't your fight." Griggs looked at her, really looked, seeing not the teenager he dismissed days ago, but a strategist hardened by necessity. "It became our fight when they took one of yours," he replied. "We planned together or not at all." Keone nodded once, her resolve momentarily visible through the carefully maintained composure. The village held its collective breath, the absence of one boy somehow heavier than all their combined presence. The makeshift command center buzzed with tension as the SEAL team huddled over a crude map drawn in the red soil. Chief Petty Officer Griggs traced potential entry points with his finger, his face lined with exhaustion. Keone stood slightly apart, her gaze fixed on the horizon where Kasim was being held. "We'll need a 2-pronged approach," Griggs muttered. "Distraction here, extraction team there." Dr. Elias Mubiru burst into the tent, clutching a battered laptop. "There's something you all need to see." His voice trembled with urgency. "My research isn't just climate data." The scientist connected his device to a portable projector. Images flickered across the tent wall. Satellite photos, topographical maps, and water flow diagrams. These show systematic water diversion from local watersheds. 3 multinational corporations have built illegal dams upstream, redirecting water from 17 villages to their industrial operations. The room fell silent. Keone's eyes widened as she recognized the dried-up riverbeds where her people once fished. "This is why they want the station destroyed," Mubiru continued, "not just to steal the data, but to erase all evidence of their crimes. Without this information, the villages have no legal recourse." Lieutenant Sarah Cho stepped forward, her face ashen. "That explains the corrupted mission files." She pulled out her smartphone, displaying a series of communications. "Our intel wasn't just faulty, it was deliberately altered. We were sent here under false pretenses." Griggs slammed his fist against the table. "Are you saying someone in our own command chain is compromised?" "It appears so," the lieutenant replied. "The coordinates we received were modified to keep us away from key water diversion sites. Someone wanted us focused on non-existent insurgents, while the real threat operated freely." Keone moved to the map, tracing the flow of the diverted rivers with her finger. "My father spoke of the waters changing before he disappeared. We thought it was drought, but it was theft." Outside, the evening wind carried distant engine sounds. The mercenaries were mobilizing, perhaps sensing that their true purpose had been uncovered. "This changes everything," Griggs said, his voice low. "We're not just rescuing Kasim anymore. We're protecting evidence that could save dozens of communities." Cho nodded grimly. "And we can't trust our own extraction protocols. If command is compromised, calling for backup might bring more enemies than allies." Mubiru clutched his laptop tighter. "Without this data, My people have no future. Keone picked up her rifle, checking the ammunition with practiced fingers. Then we protect both, Kasim and the truth. Her eyes met Griggs across the table. The water thieves have never faced people who refuse to be washed away. The lines between mission and morality, between duty and justice, had never been so dangerously blurred. The night air hung thick with tension as Keone Wanjiru crouched behind a withered acacia, her fingers tracing the intricate Maasai beadwork on her rifle strap. Each pattern represented a different signal: advance, retreat, hold position. The rescue plan was hers, crafted with the precision of someone who knew every dip and rise of the land. "Your men need to understand these signals," she whispered to Griggs, her eyes never leaving the mercenary camp where Kasim was being held. "Words will get us killed tonight." The chief petty officer nodded, newfound respect evident in his gaze. He gathered his remaining team, their faces illuminated briefly by moonlight as they studied the colorful patterns. Lieutenant Cho memorized them fastest, her analytical mind mapping each design to its corresponding action. They moved like shadows across the red clay, the teenage girl leading elite soldiers through terrain that had been her playground and classroom. When Keone raised her hand, displaying the blue and red pattern, the seals split into formation without hesitation. Dr. Mubiru waited at the rendezvous point, medical supplies ready. "Bring him back," he had told Keone earlier. "That boy carries our village's spirit." Inside the camp, they found Kasim tied to a chair, his face bruised but his eyes defiant. The young boy had revealed nothing to his captors. When he saw Keone, tears streaked through the dust on his cheeks. She cut his bonds with a single slice, pressing her finger to her lips. Their escape route followed a dry riverbed, chosen specifically because the satellite imaging Cho had accessed wouldn't show its recent changes. But as they neared the extraction point, Keone suddenly stiffened, grabbing Griggs' arm. "Not this way," she insisted, pointing to subtle tracks in the dirt that the seals had missed. "They're waiting." Griggs hesitated, fatally. "We don't have time for detours." The ambush came swiftly, gunfire erupting from positions that shouldn't have been there. 2 seals fell immediately, their bodies crumpling into the red dust. Keone pushed Kasim down, covering him with her own frame as Griggs and Cho returned fire. They escaped, but the cost was devastating. Back at the village, Kasim sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing, occasionally flinching at sounds only he could hear. The ordeal had stolen something from him that might never return. Griggs stood apart from the others, his face carved with grief and regret. "You warned me," he said when Keone approached. "Yes," she replied simply, no satisfaction in her voice. "I did." The weight of those lost lives settled between them, a painful lesson in what happens when knowledge of the land is dismissed as less valuable than tactical training. In the soft glow of the campfire, Mirembe watched her granddaughter with worried eyes, seeing how each death etched itself into her young soul. The mercenary sat bound to a metal chair in the research station's storage room, his face bruised but defiant. When Griggs yanked off the blindfold, recognition flashed across both men's faces. "Briggs? What the hell are you doing here?" Griggs stepped back, stunned to see Jason Briggs, a former SEAL who had served with him in 3 deployments before disappearing into private contracting. "Same as you, Chief. Following orders." Briggs tested his restraints with a practiced twist. "Except my orders pay a hell of a lot better." Lieutenant Sarah Cho entered, her tablet displaying Briggs's service record. "You know him?" "Afghanistan, Iraq, Philippines." Griggs's voice was flat. "He was one of us." Briggs laughed, a hollow sound that bounced off concrete walls. "Still am, brother. Just switch teams." His eyes narrowed. "This isn't your fight, Griggs. It's just business. Water rights, corporate interests, way above our pay grade." "You're threatening civilians," Cho interjected. "Collateral damage happens in every theater." Briggs leaned forward. "Listen, I can get you 20% of what we're being paid. Just walk away. Let us take the servers." Outside, they could hear Keone instructing Kasim on perimeter checks. The boy's voice, still shaken from his captivity, carried through the thin walls. Griggs stared at his former teammate. How many local conflicts had he waded through, never questioning the larger game? How many Keones had he dismissed as irrelevant to the mission parameters? "That kid out there outshot our best marksman," Griggs said quietly. "And she's fighting for her home, not a paycheck." "Don't go native on me," Briggs spat on the floor. "These people will be fighting over something else next year. We're just passing through." "Doctor," Mobiru appeared in the doorway. His normally calm demeanor hardened. "My research proves the corporation is illegally diverting water from 17 villages. This isn't a local conflict. It's systematic theft." Griggs felt the weight of his weapon, suddenly conscious of whose interests it had served over the years. The faces of 100 villages across a dozen countries flashed through his mind, places he'd secured and promptly forgotten. "Who's running your operation?" Cho demanded. Briggs smiled. "Same people who sent you bad intel, Lieutenant. Check your mission parameters again." Griggs turned away, stepping outside where Keone stood watching the perimeter, her rifle ready. She didn't look at him, but her posture acknowledged his presence. "Your prisoner talking?" she asked. "Yeah." Griggs watched the horizon. "He's talking plenty. Will you take his offer?" Her question held no judgment, just tactical assessment. Griggs thought of all the times he'd been on the wrong side of history without knowing it. "No," he said finally, "not this time." Lieutenant Sarah Cho hunched over the laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as Dr. Elias Mubiru peered anxiously over her shoulder. The dim light of the research station's backup generator cast long shadows across their faces. "There," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with triumph as the encrypted files finally began to decrypt. "Just as we suspected." The screen filled with satellite images, water flow diagrams, and damning correspondence between executives of 3 multinational corporations. Dr. Mubiru's eyes widened as he traced the blue lines showing how water had been systematically diverted from local watersheds. "This is worse than I imagined," the scientist murmured, adjusting his glasses. "They've been rerouting entire underground aquifers. No wonder the northern villages have been experiencing such severe drought." Sarah nodded grimly. "With this evidence, we could stop them. But," she paused, pointing to a blinking error message, "the complete data set is fragmented. The backup drive containing the rest is still in McKenna Village, which is now crawling with mercenaries." Chief Petty Officer Griggs interjected from the doorway, his face etched with concern. Keone Wanjiru stood beside him, her wiry frame tense with determination. "We have to retrieve it," Keone insisted, gripping her bolt-action rifle. "Without complete proof, they'll deny everything and continue stealing our water." The room erupted into debate. 2 of Griggs' team argued that protecting the current data and evacuating should be their priority. The intelligence officer countered that half evidence would never stand up to corporate lawyers. "Every minute we waste arguing, those men dig deeper into McKenna," Keone said, her voice cutting through the noise. "My father's friend has a home there. The drive is hidden beneath the 3rd floorboard from the eastern wall." Griggs studied the tactical map, calculating risks. It would be a small team operation, quick insertion, faster extraction. "I'm going," Keone stated. "It wasn't a request." "You're not a soldier," one of the SEALs objected. The teenager fixed him with a steady gaze. "And you're not Kenyan. You won't even recognize which house to search without me." Dr. Mubiru stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Keone's shoulder. "This data represents years of research. It's the only weapon we have against those who would steal our future." Sarah closed the laptop, securing it in a waterproof case. "The corporations have already dispatched cleanup teams. Once they realize what we have, they'll burn everything to the ground, evidence included." Griggs nodded. Decision made. "We move in 3 hours. Small team. Myself, Keone, and Martinez." He looked at the young Kenyan woman with newfound respect. Pack light. We're going behind enemy lines. The truth hit like a thunderbolt during the emergency briefing. Lieutenant Sarah Cho stood before the assembled team, her tablet displaying a complex array of satellite trajectory data. The satellite wasn't compromised by the mercenaries, she announced, her voice tight with disbelief. It was redirected 4 days before our arrival, by someone here. All eyes turned to Keone Wanjiru, who sat cross-legged on a wooden crate, calmly disassembling a small radio transmitter. The teenager didn't flinch under their collective gaze. "You needed to see what was happening," she said simply. "Your satellites kept looking away." Griggs stepped forward, incredulous. "You hacked a military-grade satellite? With what?" Keone gestured toward Dr. Mubiru's research station, the old weather monitoring equipment. "The frequencies aren't so different." She shrugged as if discussing something as mundane as predicting rainfall. The scientist nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "The parts I thought were missing, you repurposed them." "Show me," Cho demanded, professional curiosity overriding protocol. Behind the village school, they discovered Keone's workshop, a patchwork of salvaged electronics, hand-drawn circuit diagrams, and makeshift antennas fashioned from cooking pots and scrap metal. What appeared to untrained eyes as junk was, in reality, an ingenious communications array. "I learned from broken things," the girl explained, fingers tracing a diagram. "When aid groups leave their equipment, they never think we might fix it differently." Griggs examined a transmitter cobbled together from a smartphone motherboard and parts from 3 different devices. "This is why our comms kept dropping in the northern sector," he realized. "You were borrowing our bandwidth." The teenager nodded. "Just borrowing." Cho's face shifted between admiration and concern. "You realize what this means? If we figured this out, the mercenaries will too," Keone finished. "They already suspect. That's why they took Qasim." The implications settled heavily on the group. Keone wasn't just a guide or a sharpshooter. She was the architect behind their entire intelligence advantage. The enemy would now recognize her as the primary threat, not the SEALs. Mirembe appeared in the doorway, her weathered face a mask of worry. She had warned her granddaughter about this very moment, when skill became danger. "We need to move the equipment," Griggs decided. "Disperse it. Make it harder to target." As they worked through the night, disassembling Keone's workshop, the young engineer's hands moved with practiced precision. She had become the linchpin of their defense, the unexpected center of gravity around which their survival now orbited. "You should have told us sooner," Griggs said quietly. Keone's eyes remained on her work. "Would you have believed me before the first shot?" The waters of Lake Magadi shimmered like liquid silver in the harsh afternoon sun as enemy boats cut through the surface, their engines growling with menace. Smoke from burning farmland twisted skyward, casting an apocalyptic haze over the final confrontation. Keone Wanjiru crouched behind a rocky outcrop, her bolt-action rifle steady in hands that no longer trembled. "3 vessels approaching from the South Channel," she reported, her voice calm despite the chaos. "They'll reach the dock in 4 minutes. Chief Petty Officer Griggs nodded, studying the terrain through binoculars. The seasoned SEAL had abandoned military protocol hours ago, now fully embracing the unconventional tactics that had kept them alive. "Ready the signal," he ordered, glancing at the remaining team members spread across the shoreline. Keone raised her hand, and soft singing began to rise from the villagers hidden among the reeds. The melody, an ancient harvest song, carried across the water, each verse signaling different defensive positions. The mercenaries wouldn't understand, but every defender knew exactly when to move and where. "They're after the servers," Dr. Elias Mubiru whispered, crouching beside Lieutenant Cho. "Everything we've documented about the water diversion. Years of evidence." Sarah Cho checked her weapon, guilt and determination warring in her eyes. "They won't get it, not after everything we've lost." The first boat reached the shallows. Keone's singing changed tempo, and immediately 3 defenders shifted positions. The teenage girl had transformed their ragtag group into a coordinated unit, using knowledge no tactical manual could provide. Kasim, still bearing the physical and emotional scars of his captivity, passed ammunition to the defenders. His eyes never left Keone, drawing courage from her unwavering focus. "They're splitting formation," Griggs warned, tension evident in his voice. Keone pulled back her rifle bolt and slid a round into the chamber. The metallic click echoed across the rocks. Sharp, definitive, professional. Several SEALs turned at the sound, witnessing the transformation complete. Gone was any trace of the girl they'd laughed at upon arrival. In her place stood a warrior, eyes steady on her target. "I have the lead boat," she said simply. Mirembe watched from behind the defensive line, her weathered face a mask of pride and sorrow. The grandmother recognized what the others were only now seeing. Her granddaughter had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The first shots cracked across the water as the mercenaries opened fire. Keone's rifle answered, the report thundering across the lake. A clean hit disabled the lead boat's engine, sending it spinning. Griggs gave the signal, and the defenders rose as one. The battle for Lake Magadi, for truth, for water, for survival, had begun. And at its center stood a girl no one would ever tell to get out of the way again. The news hit Keone like a physical blow. Her father, Jabari Wanjiru, whom she had mourned for 3 years, was alive. A captured mercenary had revealed that Jabari was being held at the water diversion dam, forced to labor alongside other villagers displaced during what everyone had believed was a drought migration. "Are you certain?" Keone asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she gripped her rifle tighter. The mercenary nodded, blood trickling from his split lip. Lieutenant Cho placed a gentle hand on the teenager's shoulder. "This changes things," she said, exchanging glances with Griggs. "But it also complicates our timeline." The chief petty officer studied the satellite imagery Dr. Mubiru had pulled up on his tablet. "They're moving in from 3 directions. 2 hours, maybe less." Keone stepped away from the group, staring across the red clay landscape toward where her father might be held. The weight of impossible choices pressed down on her shoulders, making her seem smaller than her already wiry frame suggested. "If they get the research data," Mubiru explained, "they'll have everything they need to legally claim water rights across the entire region. Your father and hundreds like him will never come home." Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then heavier, a cruel irony as they fought over water rights. Keone watched droplets darken the dust around her boots. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes, to save what matters most, you must let go of what you cannot hold. "We have to destroy it," she finally said, turning to face the others. "All of it." Griggs shook his head. "Years of research. Years that will mean nothing if they take it," Keone interrupted. "My father taught me that knowledge should serve the people, not imprison them." The decision settled over the group like the gathering storm. Mubiru's shoulders slumped as he nodded his reluctant agreement. As they prepared the charges, Kasim appeared at Keone's side, his young face solemn. "I can help," he offered, no longer the carefree boy who had once followed her everywhere. Together they worked in silence, rigging the research station while the SEALs established a defensive perimeter. Each wire Keone connected represented another piece of hope sacrificed for survival. "When this is over," Griggs said as they finished, "we'll find your father." Keone nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the distant horizon where enemy vehicles were now visible, kicking up dust clouds against the darkening sky. "Get everyone to safety," she instructed, checking her rifle one last time. "I'll trigger the charges when they breach the perimeter." The scientist looked at his life's work for the final time. "Make it count," he whispered. Keone's finger hovered over the detonator as rain streamed down her face, indistinguishable from tears. For her father, for her village, for a future yet unwritten, she would sacrifice everything else. Smoke rose from the charred remains of the research station, a black plume against the harsh Kenyan sky. The servers and all the irreplaceable climate data they contained were now nothing but melted plastic and twisted metal. Dr. Elias Mabiru stood silently watching, his life's work reduced to ashes before him. The mercenaries had retreated, their prize forever beyond reach, but the victory felt hollow amid such devastating loss. "We had 15 years of rainfall patterns," the scientist whispered, his voice cracking. "Evidence that could have helped thousands." His shoulders slumped as he turned away from the smoldering ruins. Lieutenant Sarah Cho placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Your research wasn't in vain," she said. "What happened here will be documented." But even as the words left her mouth, she knew the official record would bear little resemblance to the truth. 3 weeks later, Cho sat rigid-backed before a military inquiry panel in Washington. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face as she recounted the mission's details. The corrupted intel, the corporate conspiracy, the water theft that threatened an entire region. Her testimony was meticulous, damning, and ultimately career-ending. "Lieutenant Cho has been relieved of her commission," announced the panel chairman, his words echoing through the sterile hearing room. Yet as she surrendered her insignia, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The cover-up had been exposed, even if justice remained incomplete. Half a world away, Chief Petty Officer Griggs walked the perimeter of the village one last time. His face bore fresh scars, but the deeper changes were invisible. 23 years of service, and he'd never questioned whose interests he truly served. Until now. "You're actually leaving?" Keone asked, falling into step beside him. The teenage girl carried her rifle with the same easy confidence she'd shown from the beginning, though her eyes held a new weariness. Griggs nodded. "Orders, but I won't forget this place." He paused, looking across the fields where red dust was settling back over the scars of battle. "Usually we just move on to the next hot zone. Names blur together." "And now?" she pressed. "Now I know better." He extended his hand, a gesture between equals. "The next time someone tells me it's just another local conflict, I'll remember what that really means." As the transport helicopter descended, kicking up clouds of the same red dust that had greeted their arrival, Griggs took one last look at the village. The official report would mention mission parameters, tactical decisions, and acceptable losses. It would say nothing of a girl who had taught battle-hardened SEALs what true courage looked like. The red clay embraced Keone Wanjiru's footsteps as she walked her fields at dawn, a bolt-action rifle slung over one shoulder and a weathered hoe gripped in her other hand. 3 weeks had passed since the research station burned, yet the scent of smoke still clung to everything: clothes, hair, memory. She paused at the ridge overlooking what remained of the irrigation channels she had repurposed during the siege, now slowly being reclaimed for their original purpose. "The maize will grow stronger this season," Kasim said, appearing beside her with a canvas bag of seeds. Though the boy's eyes carried shadows that hadn't been there before his capture, his voice had found a new steadiness. The thin scar along his jawline was healing well, a permanent reminder of his bravery. He worked alongside Keone now, not just as her friend, but as someone who had earned his place through fire. "The soil remembers what we did," she replied, kneeling to test the earth between her fingers. "It will forgive us eventually." From the village center came the familiar sounds of Murembe and Dr. Elias Mubiru engaged in spirited debate. The grandmother's voice carried across the fields, her traditional wisdom clashing with the scientist's modern perspective. Their arguments had become a daily ritual: preservation versus progress, violence versus patience. "Your granddaughter saved lives by destroying what you built," Mubiru insisted, gesturing toward the blackened remains of his research station. The elder woman adjusted her colorful shawl with dignity. "And what good is saving lives if we lose our souls in the process? The water will still be stolen, just not today." Keone pretended not to hear, though their words settled on her shoulders like the weight of her rifle. The village was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but healing nonetheless. Children played again in the dusty paths, though they now fashioned their games around heroic rescues and daring escapes rather than the innocent pursuits of before. The military transport that had brought the seals was long gone, leaving only tire tracks that grew fainter with each passing day. No official record would ever mention Keone's name or what had transpired here. Lieutenant Cho had promised as much in her final message, transmitted through channels known only to Mubiru. "Do you miss them?" Kasim asked, nodding toward the horizon where the Americans had disappeared. Keone adjusted the Maasai beads on her rifle strap, her fingers tracing the pattern that had once served as battlefield signals. "I miss what they taught me," she admitted, "but not what they represented." As they descended toward the waiting fields, a whispered proverb followed them on the breeze, one of Mirembe's favorites, about strength found in broken places. The village had no monuments to what had happened here, but every cautious step, every vigilant glance skyward, told the story that official records never would. The U.S. military helicopter lifted off, carrying the SEAL team away from the red clay fields they had fought to defend. Chief Petty Officer Griggs watched through the window as the village grew smaller, his mission report already sanitized and stripped of uncomfortable truths. By tomorrow, the database would show only a routine security operation with acceptable collateral damage. No mention of a teenage girl who outshot his best marksman. No record of corporate mercenaries stealing water from desperate villages. The official story would be clean, bloodless, and utterly false. In Washington, Lieutenant Sarah Cho stood before a closed military tribunal, her career ending with a dishonorable discharge. She had chosen truth over loyalty to the chain of command, exposing the altered mission parameters and corporate connections. The panel called it treason. She called it conscience. As security escorted her from the building, Sarah wondered if Keone would approve of her choice. Meanwhile, in the village, life continued with the steady rhythm of seasons. Dr. Elias Mubiru had begun rebuilding his research, starting from scratch with handwritten notes and memory. The scientist worked tirelessly, determined that the water mapping data would not be lost forever. Each evening, villagers brought him food and stories, contributing their generational knowledge to replace what technology had failed to preserve. Kasim walked with a slight limp now, a souvenir from his captivity. The boy had grown quieter, more thoughtful, but his eyes still followed Keone with unwavering admiration. He helped her teach younger children how to read weather patterns and track wildlife movements, practical knowledge that couldn't be hacked or stolen. Mirembe sat beneath the acacia tree, weaving baskets and watching her granddaughter with quiet pride. The elder had made peace with Keone's choices, recognizing in her the same fierce protection she had once felt as a freedom fighter. Some battles, she now understood, chose their warriors, and Keone Wanjiro moved through her days with purpose, rifles slung across her back more from habit than necessity. Each morning, she walked past the spot where she had shot down the surveillance drone, sometimes pausing to remember the stunned faces of the American soldiers. The young woman could still hear their laughter, the dismissive "get out of the way, kid," that had once made her blood boil. But that laughter had died the moment she pulled the trigger. Now, when foreign officials or aid workers visited, they spoke to her directly, with cautious respect in their eyes. The village children whispered her name like a talisman. Even the seasonal cattle drivers altered their routes to pay respects. No one dared tell her to get out of the way anymore.